To y'all from a dark classroom so you can see the whiteboard. And today we will be working completely with dress ups. So this is the 22-23 school year, and so I'm working out of that ELA book, but I'm going to have the ELA book out beside me while we work. And your dress up page for this year's on page 31, but it may be on a different page if you're in a different school year. And usually the dress up, the writing pages are a different color, so they're kind of easy to find. So I'm going to start with a super simple sentence, the bear talked, and I'm just going to go through the dress ups. The first one at the top of the page is a strong verb, and strong verbs have to accurately identify how someone or something is behaving. So when you're talking about a bear, so first of all, you got to find your verb. If you look at the bear talked, a verb is your action or it's memorized. So talked is your verb if you hadn't figured that out yet. So for a strong verb to accurately identify how something is, one has to really think about what a bear does. Like if I said the bear squeaked, it really wouldn't make any sense. There's another animal that squeaks. You should be getting an image in your head most likely. So think of all the types of animals that would squeak. I mean, that could identify a mouse, like an action a mouse would do, right? Squeaks, but bears don't really squeak often. Think in your head some verbs that a bear might do. I'm going to say growled. So I'm going to change talked, and I was getting at that from the beginning, to growled. And we will have strong verb charts in the classroom, so you can always refer to those as well. All dress ups must be underlined, so I highlighted it. Let me show you that again. On any typing device, whether any platform, Google Docs, Pages, Word, it doesn't really matter what you're using. It's similar steps to underline something, so I just highlighted the whole word as you see, and then in Apple, it is a paintbrush that you touch, and then you touch the underline U. If you're working in Word or Google Docs, it's still the U underlined. You click it and it underlines something. If a dress up is not underlined, it does not count. So you have to make sure that if you want a dress up to count, it has to be underlined. So the bear growled, I've done a strong verb. Our next, if you go down the page, dress up is a quality adjective. And to count as a quality adjective, there are a few rules that I make everyone follow to be accurate and to do a good job. If you look at the notes, it has to specifically describe a noun. Adjectives only describe nouns, and people get themselves in trouble with this rule. So there are also some words I just don't accept. People come up to me and they're sad because I won't, the awesome bear growled or the wonderful bear growled. If an adjective can describe a plant, a basketball player, and a day, it is not a quality adjective because those are really unrelated. Adjectives, quality adjectives have to be specific. So could I say it's a wonderful day? That sentence would make sense. Could I say it's a wonderful plant? That sentence would make sense. Could I say a wonderful basketball player? Yes. So wonderful is not a quality adjective. Thinking of quality adjectives for this sentence, the first step is to find a noun because quality adjectives only describe nouns. So reading our sentence, there's only one word that can have an adjective modifying it. So find your one noun. If you found bear, you are correct. Now, so I'm going to put my cursor here. Hopefully you saw it. I just clicked and there it is. If I used one of the adjectives that I'm not going to allow you to use, like awesome or wonderful or amazing, would it work? Would the sentence make sense? The amazing bear growled. Well, yes, it would. However, it doesn't specifically describe bear. I could say, I'm going to say, we could talk about size. I'm going to say monstrous. It's a huge bear, right? I'm going to go ahead and underline it, because if it's not underlined, it doesn't count. And now I'm going to use the adjective rule. So could I describe a plant as being monstrous? Yeah. Basketball player? Probably. They're pretty gigantic. But a day can't be monstrous. Like, it can't be like a huge day. That wouldn't make sense. So that passes the plant, day, basketball player rule that I've established. And that just helps you not use the words that could describe everything, like awesome. Those are not quality adjectives. Okay, so I've got 2 dress-ups. Moving on to my third on the page, which is an ly adverb. Adverbs, in reality, can describe a ton of things. They are such friendly words. They can describe verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. However, when you're writing an IEW, if you look at your notes, an ly adverb, it has to describe a verb. And it has to, again, be accurate and specific. Looking at our sentence, if it has to describe a verb, there's only one word in the whole sentence that it could describe. So find your verb. You should have found growled pretty quickly. So I needed to describe how the bear growled. So right now, think about how a bear could growl. I'm just going to put loudly. I'm sure that your sweet brains came up with something better. But how did the bear growl? It growled loudly. I'm going to underline it, or again, it does not count. All right, so that's our ly adverb. Who, which clause. A who, which clause has a few rules. It has to describe a noun. So again, if we think about the nouns in this sentence, there's only one, right? Bear. But it has to describe a noun, or it does not count. And cannot come before this clause. I think that's a typo in your book. Oh, a verb. That does make sense. Sorry, it's really early for me still. A verb must not come before this clause in order for it to count. This rule might be amended. However, I personally like having your who, which clauses in the subject. It makes for a much stronger sentence. And it's round and around and around we go. But if you want an accurate, strong who, which clause, it needs to go in your subject, which means it has to come after bear because it has to describe a noun. We will get more into this in class, but if it's describing, you see under who, which clause, it says it has to describe a noun. This is the only noun in the sentence. If we added a prepositional phrase back here like at the mouse, the monstrous bear loudly growled at the mouse, then mouse would be another noun, which you may add a who, which clause behind that mouse and describe the mouse. But in my opinion, it's strong. It creates the strongest sentence if you put the who, which clause in your subject. So I'm going to go ahead. This is my only noun. I'll get my cursor behind it. This clause is separated by commas before and after the clause. So I'm going to go ahead and put a comma. All right, is a bear a who, a person, or is it a which? It's a which, right? It's not a person. The monstrous bear, which was surrounded by cubs, comma, loudly growled. A who, which clause. If you're brand new to IEW, a who, which clause, which I've highlighted here, has to be a complete thought. That who, the word who or which, replaces your subject. So if I took the clause out, all the highlighted words, I'm going to pretend it's not there. The monstrous bear loudly growled. Is that a complete sentence? Yes. Which was surrounded by cubs. Now you might think like, that's not a complete thought. That doesn't make sense. The which replaces the noun. So I'm just going to take the noun, like bear. The bear was surrounded by cubs. Does that make sense? It does. Because your who, which clause replaces your subject ultimately. So who, which clause has to have two complete thoughts fused together, and it's surrounded by commas. So the monstrous bear loudly growled, a complete thought. The bear was surrounded by cubs. That would be a complete thought. So this is an appropriate who, which clause. I have highlighted from comma to comma. Each comma is highlighted right now. I'm going to click underline to make it count. In your notes it says the clause is separated by commas before and after the clause. Make sure to underline the commas, so I've done that correctly. Now we're moving on to a because clause. The because clause creates dependent clauses. Okay, if the dependent clause comes first in a sentence, you need a comma after the clause. You do not need a comma if the dependent clause comes second. That's a lot of words. So because clauses make complex sentences. Okay, So right now, this is actually a simple sentence, and I'm just going to add a because clause at the front. Because she was being hunted, comma. Now that T will go lowercase. Because she was being hunted. Okay, let me check my rules. It creates dependent clause. If it comes at the beginning, we need a comma. There's our comma. Because clauses are dependent clauses, which means they cannot stand on their own. Quick unpacking of a complex sentence, which we will spend a month on, probably complex sentences. The dependent clause, if I just said, because she was being hunted, and that's all I gave you, you would be waiting for more. It's a dependent clause. It depends on another thought. Independent clauses finish your thought. They don't need the dependent clause. So think about this. If what's highlighted is your dependent clause, let's read the rest. The monstrous bear, which was surrounded by cubs, loudly growled. Are you waiting to figure anything out? Are you waiting for me to explain something else with that? No. It's the independent clause. The part that is not highlighted is the independent clause. It can stand on its own. It doesn't need anything. But dependent clauses depend on the independent clause to finish the thought. Because she was being hunted, the monstrous bear, which was surrounded by cubs, loudly growled. That is now a complete thought. And we will unpack and unpack and unpack complex sentences for the sake of right now the because clause. So it has to have obviously because in it. If it comes at the front of the sentence, like this one does, because she was being hunted, a comma has to go at the end. Now, it can come at the end. I'm going to show you that, okay? So this is what I've created. I'm just going to copy this whole thing. I'm going to show you how the because clause can move and still make sense, which is awesome that you guys have. Everyone has that flexibility. Okay, so I've got to change my capitalization. The monstrous bear, which was surrounded by cubs, loudly growled because she was being hunted. So it doesn't matter if you put your because clause in the front or if you put it at the end. It still counts, but it has to be underlined. Now, the last dress up on the page is the Asia clause. And this, if we added an Asia clause at this point, it would make a run-on sentence. Because Asia clauses are dependent clauses as well. That's why I teach these last once I get to complex sentences. Because once we unpack complex sentences, you know how to use the because clause and the Asia clause correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out this because clause simply because I cannot have a because clause and an Asia clause in the same sentence without the sentence being a run-on. So I'm going to get rid of this because clause. Now, an Asia clause, you see all the words when, while, where, as, since, if, although. All of these create dependent clauses. Just like because clause couldn't stand on its own because it was being hunted, it can't stand on its own. Asia clauses cannot stand on their own. If you look at your notes, it creates dependent clauses, and it has the same rule. If it comes at the beginning of the sentence, it needs a comma after it. If it comes at the end, it does not. So let's see. Looking at my list of words: when, while, where, as, since, if, or although. I'm gonna use although. Although she was this is not my strongest sentence, but okay. Although she was completely safe, the monstrous bear, which was surrounded by cubs, loudly growled. I'm going to underline the comma in the entire clause. I'm going to underline it to make it count. And this will work exactly like the because clause, that you can put it at the beginning of the sentence or you can put it at the end of the sentence. You do need correct punctuation. So if your Asia clauses come at the beginning of the sentence, although she was completely safe, I do need that comma, and I have it right here, highlight right there, okay? Or Asia clauses can come at the end. So I'm going to do the exact same thing and prove that to you that I did with the because clause. It changes just some of the capital letters, so I'm going to change this T to a capital. The monstrous bear, which was surrounded by cubs, loudly growled, although she was completely safe. Need to not. There we go. So if an Asia clause comes at the beginning of a sentence, it needs a comma after it. If it comes at the end of a sentence, it does not need a comma. So this is all of your dress ups.